You know, it's important that you're here. We're excited that you're here because we are engaged in a comprehensive planning process. And if you weren't here, it wouldn't be a comprehensive plan. You know, we could take Dennis and a couple others and lock them in a room and tell them, come out in 6 months with a plan, but that wouldn't really accomplish much of anything. You know, I have folks that sometimes come to me and say, what is the city's plan for my neighborhood? And what I want to say back to them is, what's your plan for your neighborhood? Because there's an important role for government to play in the way in which we lead the city, in the way in which we resource the city, and envision what it is in the future. But it's not the government's sole, the government is not the sole entity that needs to be involved in that process. The reality is we need to plan what our city is going to look like. It's not my city, it's not Dennis's city, it's not Tommy Battle's city. It's our city. And so that's why we call it a comprehensive plan. Because not only is it comprehensive as in looking at the entire city, it's comprehensive as in getting as many of the voices that we possibly can out of the community to envision what this community should look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 80 years from now. There are discussions that you will engage in tonight and input that you will provide to us that as it comes out and publishes and then we actually execute it collectively. In some cases, it may be a public entity that executes something in that plan. In other cases, it's more appropriate for a private entity to execute the things in the plan. But those are things that will still exist 80 years from now, 100 years from now. If we go set aside a piece of land as a park or a greenway and we build it out, your great-great-grandchildren will still be riding their bicycles on those greenways. Those things tend to stay forever. Look at some of the roads we built. You know, what may look like a new road follows the exact same route of a road that used to be a goat path 150 years ago, right? So as we build out our city, as we envision what it is going to look like, and then we actually together begin executing that plan, we're making very, very permanent decisions on behalf of our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and just keep adding greats. You know, that's what we're doing. That's what you're doing here tonight. So I think we're doing something pretty important in terms of your city government leading the planning process, but we aren't doing the planning process for you. We as a community are engaged in a comprehensive planning process, and that's why it's incredibly important that you're here. We're excited you're here. We wish there was 10 times the number of people here tonight to engage in that process, because at the end of this, and it's going to be a long process, but when we publish that plan, it's our plan. It's not Tommy Battle's plan, it's not my plan, it's not Dennis's plan. It's our plan as a community. And so it's important that we continue to get as many folks in as we can to engage in that process and ensure that just as many voices as possible help write the words that are in that plan that Dennis ultimately publishes on behalf of our community. I think that the plan that gets published, and as we begin to execute it, it's going to take what is already a phenomenal community and make that times 10. And it's going to be because of the things that you do here tonight. You being here makes a difference. Thank you for being here. We're excited for the outcome of tonight, just like we had a couple nights ago, another event, and got great input from that, all of them that we've held, and they'll be continue to have those, you know, every couple months or so. You'll see the schedules from Dennis, but it's important that you come back for all of those. Bring your friends, bring your spouses, bring everybody you can get your hands on to come add to the chorus of voices that will ultimately decide what Huntsville looks like 100 years from now. So thank you for being here.
He's right, it is important. This has been 6 or 8 months we've already been into this. We've had a number of citizen academies already. We've had focus groups. We've gone out to communities, from civic associations to Boy Scout troops to Hudson Alpha. We've been all over the place. And this is still the dialogue phase. This is us sharing a lot of what we know in terms of planning, but needing to hear back from y'all as far as what your vision is and how it can be shaped for the future. And again, we are planning, 1 year out, 3 years out, 5 years, 10 years. The courses and the things that exist in our city now, in many cases, those courses were set decades ago. And it's really important, if we're going to do course corrections now, to understand that every ripple that we make is going to have a long reverberation. So this is our agenda for this evening. Once you get through listening to me go on welcome and introductions, I'm going to bring up Lakey Boyd. She is our consultant. She is out of Atlanta. She is a planner and an expert in economic development and market analysis. She's going to talk a little bit about how our communities are changing and how that's affecting demand, because inevitably every city reflects the people who live there. And when that happens, if the community begins to change, then the city begins to change along with it. And how that happens depends on what we do throughout this process. And then we're going to do something that we actually haven't done before in a Citizens Academy. We're going to have a little bit of a design guidelines panel. We've had a lot of questions about design guidelines and overlays and concerns about how we can take some of our existing fabric and make sure that as it develops or redevelops, that it does so in a way that's a little more consistent with the community vision. So we've got a few folks up. I think we may actually lose one of our panelists because he's dealing with design guidelines in a whole other city right now. But we will have Mr. John Blue, Mr. Jerry Cargile, and Ms. Lisa Leddo here with us this evening to discuss that. And then after that, we're going to do a breakout session. Very quick. If you were here on Tuesday, that was a little more involved. This one's going to be a little quicker, and it's going to be related to some of our panel discussion. And we're also going to, because we're a slightly larger venue, hold your questions until we get through all the presentation. And then what we'll do is anyone who has, if you've got questions on design guidelines, the panelists have, I'd like to say they've agreed to stay behind. By saying this now, I'm hoping it sort of obligates them to stay behind. They're going to stay and answer questions about their particular experiences and projects. But Lakey and I and the long-range planning staff, we are typically the last to leave these events. We will stay here until Challenger kicks us out. If you have any questions about anything you saw tonight, or if you have questions about stuff you saw on our website online, or that you got through our newsletter or any of that, we will stay here and we'll answer them. You'll get to talk to Lakey, you'll get to talk to me or any of our staff if you have any questions or concerns or comments that you want to share with us. With that, I'm going to roll into what I think will be a very good presentation. This is our low-tech portion of the evening, when you get to see behind the curtain. And I'm going to introduce Lakey Boyd with Reposit Strategies.
Excited to be here. Was interesting navigating the parking lot, I have to say, but I'm sure if you're here every day, it's a much easier endeavor. I'm sure they got a lot of people to move through here. So, as Dennis said, I think what I'm trying to do this evening is give some context to design guidelines and why you do them, why they matter, how they're relevant. They can kind of be the really technical. A lot of people don't think it's the fun, snazzy part of planning, but fundamentally what's happening in your regulations, whether it be zoning or overlay or design guidelines, hugely impact what your community looks like and thus how it operates and how people feel comfortable or don't in the community. So I think it is an important piece of the puzzle that often doesn't get enough airtime, so to speak. So I'm happy you're doing it tonight, happy that I can try and give some lead in to help you, reframe how to think about it. Wrong clicker. I'm a Mac person, can you tell? Okay, so America is changing. Newsflash, right? I'm sure you didn't know that until you walked in the room this evening. America is changing, and I think that people sense it, you feel it. You might directly have a personal experience. Your business might have really changed in the last few years. Regardless of the reason, I think a lot of people don't know and don't exactly understand the changes that are happening and how it is starting to alter the way that community operates, the way that development happens, and the way that cities and municipalities are responding. So I'm going to start with homegrown, right? This is America. Norman Rockwell, 1942. This is from the Four Freedoms series based on FDR's State of the Union. I think that it is an iconic piece of America. And what I would say about this painting, which at the time was done, with actual paints, not on a computer. It really represents where the country happened to be at that time. And you have to understand that it was at the time of FDR's address, it was still a new idea in America that you had a right to be free from want. So this was the land of plenty, the idea that this is what America is going to be about. And I think it hugely reflected America at the time and had a lot to do with the path that went forward for the next several decades. Welcome to where we are today. So this, first and foremost, is a campaign that Verizon Wireless did last year. Thanksgiving time, the idea of Friendsgiving. And there's a play, right? There's a play on the Norman Rockwell iconic Piece of America. Everything from perhaps we're not all blood related when we get together for the holidays, the role of technology, are we more single, we're culturally diverse. And I think that people see this, you see it, you know it, I feel that this is happening, but what are all of the underlying pieces of the puzzle as to why those changes are happening? So that's what I want to walk through. I think that this is something that you've probably seen, and I will tell you, I talk a lot about generations in communities. I do a lot of, here's how millennials are, and here's how baby boomers are, and here's how it's shaping our marketplace, and it is all valid. Generations are relevant because there are surprising similarities given age groupings. I think that it can be a way to categorize people to better connect and understand and maybe more quickly move through a process. But the reality is that generations can also start to feel like a box, right? You've been in those presentations where you're like, yes, that is me, that is exactly, how did you know I think that way? And at the same time, you're like, well, whoa, that's not me. And I don't believe that, or I don't relate to that. So I would say, and this might be, I will put forward my potential bias, that I'm a Gen Xer, and I spend a whole lot of time talking about millennials and baby boomers, right? It's like my generation doesn't even exist. So I'm going to put forward tonight that I want to think about this a little differently. I want you to think about how behaviors are changing and not what an age group might or might not be driving, because what is happening in the marketplace is that there might be a push because there's a larger group of population in a certain age group, but the reality is the market is responding, community is responding, and these kind of behaviors transcend age. It is irregardless, right? I can still get excited about technology just because I wasn't born, 10 years earlier or later. So I think that I want to really put forward how these changes are happening. So I'm going to walk you through a series of key statistics, everything you needed to know, but hopefully in a very interesting format. This is what I call the big three. This is fundamentally changing our culture in America today. 3 key movements. One, we're getting older, right? Newsflash, every single person in this room is getting older every day. 10,000 people in America turn 65 every day. Started 2011, will continue at that pace until 2030. So the impact that is going to have on life choices, on people leaving the workforce, on housing type, on healthcare, is very significant, and we've never had this size of a population kind of turn all of this age at the same time. We're living longer, so there's a lot of ramifications about what that might do and where the direction that might take America. In terms of diversity, we are increasingly diverse. Right now in America, approximately 1/3 of Americans are considered in a minority racial classification. So all that means is that historically America has been majority Caucasian. The reality is that we are moving at a much quicker pace towards multicultural diversity, and depending where you live in the country, it might be at an even faster pace. By 2050, there will be no majority race in America. So we will all be less than 50%, But I think that as much as people can identify and say, okay, I know that immigration is a source of that, the biggest driver is natural population change. So what I mean by that is that much earlier, babies being born in this country no longer have a majority, and that's projected to happen sometime around 2030. So not too far away. And again, rethinking what that American experience is going to be like. The other of the three, the big three, is women and the change in roles in society, in the home, and work, and all those kind of things. This is actually from the cover of The Economist, and the statistics, I think people respond kind of differently to, and I'm just here to report them. But in terms of workforce, we are now at 49.9, and I could not make that up, right? 49.9% of the American workforce are women. 40% of businesses are owned by women. 43% of executive administrative positions are held by women today. So the wage gap is narrowing. In some statistics of people in their 20s, there is actually a point where men and women are being paid equally. So all of that relates to how is that going to change the family structure, the wage structure, the choices that are being made. Educational attainment, women surpassed men 25 and older, higher education, so bachelor's or higher, 2 years ago. Now 37% of women over 25 have a bachelor's or higher, while 35% of men. But when you look at people in their 20s, the gap is actually much higher. Women, 38%, men, 27%. So fewer men are going to college versus women right now in this country. So what does that mean for the direction and where we're going to end up heading? In terms of our families, single parents, welcome to what is the more dominant lifestyle for parenting. 1/3 of households in America are single parents. Traditional families, meaning a husband, wife, and kids under 18, represent 1 in 5 households today. 20%. It is a greater majority of single parent families as well as single person households. And that's a combination of divorce, getting married later, choosing to live together, financial choices, widowing. There's a lot of reasons, but single person households are actually the fastest growing households in America and are projected to be the dominant household type somewhere in the mid-2020s. So in the next about 10 years, that will be the majority household type in America. So very different, right, than I think that Norman Rockwell image and kind of how I think a lot of people are still thinking about America today. In terms of multi-generational, pretty straightforward. Some of it is out of this great, loving, community positive, I want to have a multi-generational experience, and some is out of economic necessity. Grandparent-headed households have grown between the ages of 25 and 34. 20% of males live at home with their parents. So I would not want to be dating right now, right? I can see some of those women in that little demographic. 1 in 10 women. So 10% of women between age 25 and 34 living at home with their parents. So it is, for several reasons, this picture is one of those happy reasons. We all want to be here together. Sometimes it's not so happy, but regardless, it is a change that's happening. Our homes, the role they have, I think, has changed drastically. Clearly, we've had a reduction in value after the Great Recession. It certainly is estimated, depending on your community, it can be greater, at least 30%. There's an estimate of between 20 and 25% of mortgages in America are still in a negative equity position, so they owe more than the house is worth. Rental has increased significantly by choice. And I think that, yes, part of it is driven by people that saw their parents go through something and kind of feel trapped and said, I don't want a piece of that. Part of it's I want to be mobile and be able to test drive communities. And part of it is divorce rates, widowing, just a completely different choice that is being made. What else is important to understand about rental is that about 40% of the rental market is single-family homes. So when I say that, I'm not talking just apartments. It is a variety. There's also a movement inward. So this isn't just to major metropolitan areas. This is just a movement towards the core of cities, looking generally for more choice. About 275 million Americans now, which is just past a majority, are living inside of incorporated city limits versus in a county or in an unincorporated area. Our work. As you can imagine, with all these kind of changes happening in our behaviors in our personal life, it's really impacting the way that work is happening in America. The Great Recession clearly had a big impact on that. Small businesses continue to dominate. 90% of businesses in America employ less than 10 people. Depending on how you define a small business, so less than 10, less than 50, it's between somewhere 30% to 50% of the American workforce work for small businesses. So as much as large corporations are seen and in the news and mergers, and those things are all happening, it's still a big piece of our economy, but the foundation and the bulk of our economy are small businesses. Entrepreneurs and who they are is changing. So there is some dispute. There's some recent numbers in the last year or so that have come out that kind of question, is economic dynamism kind of dying in America? Are we not having as much starts as we did? The reality is that we still have it as a foundation. Startups are still active. There's a lot of dispute about data sources and how we're defining. What we know is that there's been an increase in what we call opportunity entrepreneurs, which means people choosing to become an entrepreneur, not I got laid off and I got to figure out what I'm going to do. So a lot of legit businesses have come out of that situation, but nonetheless, we know that that is still happening quite a bit, but who is doing it is changing. The peak age for entrepreneurs is mid-30s to mid-40s. I think that there's kind of this, image of this tech kid that, started programming and, is a millionaire by age 21. And those, they're there, right? You have some right here in Huntsville. But what is important is that it's seasoned executives, personal capital, extensive network. So how they're doing business is also altering how flexible and collaborative work is happening. So everything from co-working and shared office space and working from home, there's been a huge rise in what we call location neutral workers. I put this image in because I want to assure you this is a real small business, okay? This one, it's a company called Schwood out of Oregon. They won Small Business of the Year in a national competition. They make wooden sunglasses, so we're talking the whole nine, right? American-made, craftsman production, manufacturing, and this is who they are. This is the face of American business today. Lastly, our money. The nicest way I can say it is that it's modified dramatically in the last several years. So, debt, we still have an average in America of a debt-to-income ratio of 126%. We're making it up. We're not spending as much as we used to in terms of the pace of that ratio, but we are still out of whack that we owe more than what we make. In terms of poverty, this is the face of poverty in America today. 22% of children in America live in poverty. And just to give you some context, poverty today is defined as a family of four living on $23,000. 22% of kids. So the number gets bigger when we have some different ways to measure it. So if you were to say a kid, do they have one parent with a full-time job, year-round secure employment, Now you're talking about 35% of children do not live in a household like that. So in terms of how much tumult there has been in our structure, it's been significant, and I think you have to get a real read on who's been impacted most by that. Lastly, unemployment. The main thing to point out there, as much as we have gotten better and increased or lowered unemployment, increased employment, long-term unemployment, which is 6 months or longer, is still about a third, which is still at a higher rate than it was after the Great Depression. Youth unemployment is almost at a quarter of age 16 to 24-year-olds. So again, getting into the workforce, starting a career path, getting the experience, wealth accumulation, all those things get impacted when we have stats and behaviors like this. So you can imagine if how we're living, how we're working, how we're shopping, how we're spending our money, how our families are structured, if all those things are changing, then clearly the role of place, the role of community, and I'm telling you, I'm going towards design guidelines, I promise you. All of that relates to community and how and where it happens. So this is the role of place previously, right? I mean, this is literally advertisements. It was all about the house. The American dream was the house, the yard, and what was inside the house. What were all of those awesome modern conveniences that you can't live without. This is a collection of residential real estate ads from around the country, and you might notice there's really not a house, right? There's not certainly a listing of, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, this many square feet. It's all about lifestyle now. It's all about buying into the community. It's much more about what's happening outside of the home than it is inside. Now, I'm not saying there's no importance on the inside, but kind of once I've got some key boxes checked, then it's all about what community am I going to be a part of. The recent study released by National Association of Realtors, the estimate is, according to the survey, 80% of buyers will give up the size of their home to choose a neighborhood. Now, I'm not saying they're choosing between 2,500 square feet and will go to 500, but they will have an exchange based on the kind of neighborhood and community they want to get into. So, to understand role of place today, this is my limited economic concept for you. Place now equals a commodity in America. So all that means in remember back to like junior high economics, all it means is a marketable item, good or service that satisfies a want or a need. And place has really become elevated to that. I'm not buying a house, I'm buying the neighborhood, I'm buying the school, I'm buying the church, I'm buying my neighbors. It's all part of that. And I think that it really takes a turn to understand if we're behaving like this and the demand is shifted like that, the kind of what I mean by neighborhood, what I mean by community is really shifting. So one of the things I'm asked a lot is, okay, that's all great, but what does it really mean? Will people pay more money for that? Is there a premium value? So this is my nod to all of you that want to know the stats. So I'm not going to walk through each of these. The main thing to know is that the priority right now, based on the survey with National Association of Realtors, the number one choice is quote-unquote suburban neighborhood with a mix of houses, shops, and businesses. Now, I want all that, but I still want a single-family detached house. So I am not here to tell you everyone wants to live in Manhattan in a tower. Okay, that is not the case. But this is very much some of the types of development you're seeing here in Huntsville. And I'm here to say there's a whole lot of people that want that type of development, and or communities are looking at exactly through design guidelines, how do we retrofit and amenitize community to achieve those things. I'll also point out the estimate is somewhere between 5% to 15% premium, but when you start adding in walkability, and for those of you that are familiar with the walk score, commercial real estate has a huge impact. So these are premiums, these aren't growth values. Pre-recession, it was almost 25% rent premium. Post-recession, we're now at almost 45% in terms of commercial performance. Anywhere from 700 to 3,000 per walk score improvement, depending on kind of where you live in the country. The other stats to mention are transit. There is without question a premium for transit. Again, that's such a spectrum, right? So am I next to a bus stop? Am I next to a metro station? Am I in a TOD development? Kind of depending, the increase in value can be anywhere from 5 to 100 to 50%. Residential settles somewhere around 40%, but can be upwards depending again on kind of what part of the country you're in. Lastly, there's this idea of location efficiency. So essentially, if you take mixed use, transit, walkability, and kind of put it all together, a place has a high location efficiency. What we have found, study after study after study, has really proven that there's been less mortgage default even after the recession. It has delivered a much more stable tax base in terms of fluctuation, and a lot of people are starting to term, based on the statistics, that it really has performed and come out to be recession resilient, which certainly a whole lot of places cannot say that. So we're seeing it delivering in economic sustainability. This is the only chart I have, so please just bear with me. It's very simple. There is a red line, and that is conventional suburban development. And there's a blue line, and that is mixed-use walkable development. And all this is saying is, it starts out, I tend to walk, I'm going to try and stay right here. So it starts out, and in the short term, there's a quicker value to conventional development. In the midterm, somewhere between 5 and 10 years, there's a shift, and there's a much higher increase in the mixed-use development. In long term, it has much higher stable performance. I'm going to break it down as simply as I can, that it is as straightforward as the cost of land is what it is, and conventional development competes on low cost and new. So the next one comes in and it's still a low cost. The resale in this subdivision hasn't really appreciated, so if I'm a buyer, I might as well go to this one, get a new house, be a little further out. I'm going to have all the retail kind of come down and come around me, out on the corridor. The challenge with the mixed use, and why in the short term out of the box it doesn't perform better, even though over time it does, has largely to do with some structural issues in the way we have developed historically. So it's everything from, is the infrastructure there? Is the regulatory environment there? And then those lovely, lovely human beings that are lenders and bankers and institutions like that, right? So the way they value assets, mixed use is still not fully understood depending where you are in the country, and as much as you want it to feed off of each other, so the whole point is to have the retail function with the residential function with the office, they still want to kind of compartmentalize it. And so financial performance doesn't start to all feed off of each other until it's all phased out and built, and that's when the midterm kicks in. So that is your economics 101 lesson that hopefully is straightforward enough that you can begin to understand. It's why the planning combined with patience ultimately delivers that payoff with long-term investment and value. I include this quote. Frankly, it's not like anything in the quote is so earth-shattering. What is the combination of growth patterns, quality of life, economic development, linked to community, being said by National Association of Realtor president. That's why it matters. This has permeated America. This is not a new idea. This isn't kind of that new, different way to develop. We're far enough in, The numbers have been reported. It is a tried and true. And if you really stop and think about it, it's the historic development pattern of America and what we know has kept value as people have returned to those historic cores. So it really is about this process. You have to always start first with the who. You have to understand who the people are, who the community is. The what is really about the place. And then the how that you get there is those kind of not fun, not super sexy, snazzy regulations. But that's what ultimately, if you get people in the right place and combine and mix water, that's how you get community. And that's what Americans are hungry for. And I think that is why the drive towards figuring out this kind of development, why people turn out on a weekday evening to talk about design guidelines. So hopefully this has given you some context of why it matters and I think how it's relevant to your everyday, a broad brush view of the performance, and then Dennis has put together a great panel to really talk through, here's the experience and the nuts and bolts and how it really works. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Lakey, for that. Hopefully that kind of teed everything up for you in terms of what we're going to talk about next. And granted, design guidelines, I hope you also got from her presentation, are one piece of the puzzle. There are a number of different ways that you can approach improving design within a community. We've talked about a lot of them through the big picture. I hope every single person has been to this website and seen this picture and many others. If you haven't, shame on you. I'm hoping also that you've signed up for the newsletter that comes out of this website. Where's James Vandiver? James Vandiver, way in the back, long-range planning staff, works very, very hard on our newsletter that comes out every other week, chock full of information on what we're doing and what we're studying. I am certain that every single one of you has signed up for it. If you haven't, you can do it on your smartphone right now. So we're going to move into this panel on design guidelines. Granted, Lakey kind of talked about it in some broad brush terms. If you guys want to, if you wouldn't mind coming on up and we'll have our panel populate. But what I'm going to ask is Lisa Leddo, who's with the city, is going to talk a little bit first, give a little bit more definition. We sometimes, even planners are guilty of using some terms interchangeably. We talk about design guidelines versus design standards versus zoning versus overlays versus smart code, and there are some differentiations among them that I think Lisa could probably give a little bit of definition to, and then because I did a lousy job organizing my slides, then I'll introduce the rest of the panel and we'll go from there. Lisa, if you don't want to, we have a few questions up here that Lisa's going to answer from us right for the get-go.
For design guidelines, the first question, what do they oversee? They maintain a certain level of quality of architectural or historical character. They address features such as building facades, public spaces, landscaping, the location of buildings, as far as they relate to where they are on their property. Design guidelines, they can recommend openings or animation to a building's facade, but the appearance of a building does not change how it functions. So you have design guidelines, which are recommendations as to how to make a building look more attractive. It's more aesthetic-based than anything else. You have design standards, which the terms are used interchangeably really now. Design standards are mandatory. If you have a certain area of your town that you want to look a certain way, you may have design standards, which means you have a certain architectural character that those buildings must reflect if they're new or rebuilt. That leads us to the last question is how are they different from form-based code? Design guidelines and design standards can be overlays over a zoning district. An overlay means it doesn't change what's going on, but it adds another level of regulation to what's going on with that zoning district. A form-based code, on the other hand, is most often an actual zoning district. And it is a mandatory set of regulations that often include design guidelines or standards, and it outlines a specific form, urban form, rather than zoning by use. Now, zoning, if you don't know, is zoning districts are a way to regulate use in a community. And there's 3 basic zoning designations: residential, commercial, and industrial. Now, within those, there are lots of others. The City of Huntsville actually has over 60 different zoning districts. That's a lot. There's several residential districts, and those differentiate the different residential districts by density. Anywhere from large lot, single-family lots, to multifamily, and everything in between, your patio homes, your townhomes. Then you have the different types of commercial districts, your neighborhood commercial, your highway commercial. And then you also have your industrial districts. And there's lots of other districts in between those and additional ones. There's also existing overlay districts. There's your floodway districts and your slope districts. Those are overlaid on top of the zoning districts. And again, zoning districts, for the most part, differentiate between use: residential, commercial, industrial. So design guidelines add recommendations and/or regulations regarding the aesthetic character of a development. Again, that's what it looks like, what it feels like. Design guidelines do not change the underlying zoning district regulations. So if you have design guidelines, for example, in a neighborhood, it doesn't change the use. It doesn't rezone the neighborhood. It's still a residential neighborhood, but you'll have design guidelines as to what the homes look like. And it works the same way for commercial or industrial. If you have design guidelines, then those regulations apply to how those buildings look. And for example, this is under conventional zoning. This is the zoning that most cities have. This is what the City of Huntsville has, this conventional zoning. You see a typical, let's say this is a shopping mall. Conventional zoning addresses setbacks, your parking, your landscaping requirement, of course, your use. And you see here, this is say a shopping mall. And we have minimum setbacks, but not maximum in our zoning districts. And we have parking requirements. So this is a typical shopping mall, and there you go. That's what it looks like in real life, unfortunately. That's a shopping mall. They've got all their parking and their lighting. But these large shopping malls and these large shopping centers, as you heard, our way of life is changing. So you're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of these shopping deserts. Now this, when we're talking about design guidelines, you can see this is the same building, and this is actually East Lake Mall in Chattanooga. This is what they did to there. You can see that the facade is different. You have a lot more articulation. You have a lot more openings around the building. So it's a little more welcoming. It looks a little nicer, but it doesn't change the function of the building. It's still a large shopping mall. And here's the overview of it. So you can see the difference. You got a little more landscaping in the parking lot. That would be part of the design guidelines. And you can see the exterior of the building. It's a little more welcoming. You've got a little more openings. And there it is in an actual photograph. Now with form-based code, which again can be an overlay, but most often is its own zoning district, allows a mix of uses for the most part, but a form-based code makes it more walkable, more welcoming. You see, this is the same area if it were developed under a form-based code that permitted a different type of building. They're smaller buildings, and here you see the facades of those buildings. You have more public space, more shared space, more open areas, more walkability, more connectivity. And that's really important because we heard how everything's changing. It's a healthier lifestyle to walk other than if you had to drive from your neighborhood. You can see the commercial center from your house, but you have to get out of your neighborhood onto a main street, drive to the shopping center, whereas if it were interconnected, you could just walk there. So here we see the building form standards, and that specifies where the building is on the property. You can see that these buildings are lined up on the property line, how tall they are, the street types, how accessible, how welcoming. Those are different form, and again, the key word is form. And here you see the difference. On the right is what most of us are accustomed to seeing. You see the parking lots in the front, the building in the back. But on the left is what you can have with form-based codes. If it specifies where the building is built, you see it's a more pedestrian-friendly area. The parking lots are at the rear instead of the front. It's a little more welcoming and a healthier lifestyle again. And here, this is what we're talking about, aesthetics. Now, this can be under your design guidelines, your design standards, or under your form-based code. You can see that the photo to the left, that area is not quite as welcoming, might be not considered quite as safe because of the lack of activity. The one on the right, you can see a lot more animation, again, to the street. You can see this, the landscaping adds to the aesthetics of it. And people like to be where people are. They like to see activity, they like to see what other people are doing. And so the people, just that mass of people attracts more people because they want to see what's going on. Here you see the difference, the area to the left. You see the same buildings on the left side of the street. On the right side of the street, there's a parking lot. Now look at the difference if you put the parking in the rear. Totally different feel and character to this based on the design guidelines. And with design guidelines, again, that includes street types. What do you want your streets to look like? How do you want them to function? And you can add, you can see in the top here, you can have bicycle lanes, you can have more pedestrian access, and all that can be included in your design guidelines or in your form-based code. And here's an example of what one city did to make their strip areas look more aesthetically pleasing and actually function better. You see more interconnectivity between the parking lots, a lot more landscaping, breaking the parcels down into smaller areas, because you heard that 90% of our businesses now are small businesses. They don't need those large boxes. They need smaller individual buildings. And so there's going to be more of a demand based on that for the individual buildings rather than these large empty shopping centers. And so here's what you can see that you can have with either design guidelines or form-based code. And the next 4 slides, you can see how it builds up. The buildings are adjacent to the street, you have landscaping, and that results in a lot more people using your community. And so form-based codes let you emulate the places you admire and avoid the ones you don't. And that is the most important thing to remember. They help you avoid the things that you don't want and have the things that you do.
Great, thank you, Lisa. That was a great primer. Down at the far end of the table, we have Jerry Cargile. Jerry Cargile is one of the principals of Foresight Engineering. They're an engineering and planning firm based here in Huntsville. You are a professional engineer, and he's also lead AP. I always mix up accredited and certified. People are accredited, buildings are certified, right? So you are not a building, so you are accredited.
I'm certifiable.
Certifiable, and his firm is very active with the land trust, and if you cozy up to him, he might find you a seat at the moon dance this weekend.
The weather's going to be great, I understand.
It will
there
be
may still
spectacular,
be tickets available.
and hooray for me, I'll be out of town. Regretting that. Lisa Leddo, you just heard from, is a senior planner with the City of Huntsville. She is a UA graduate. That's Alabama, right? I'm sorry, I'm not from around here. She's got a master's in regional and urban planning, and she's actually been working for the city for 25 years. She's had a lot of experience in how our codes are implemented and how our zoning works, or in some cases doesn't. And then lastly, but not leastly, obviously, is John Blue, also an Alabama grad. A lot of history here in the city, a lot of experience doing real estate and development within the community. I think most of you are familiar with some of his bigger projects, like the Ledges, and he's got one of the new kind of prototypes that's just coming out of the ground right now, which is Lendon, which is in Jones Valley, and that's a little more in keeping when you start to look at it and you start to look in the planning around it. With kind of what some of Lakey was talking about in terms of how design is moving. And so it actually, since we come back this way, I'd like to start with John, start off with a question for you. Why did you choose to start making that shift to neighborhood development that has design guidelines or design standards associated with it?
Because I've been passionate about the history, and I love architecture, and I like historical architecture. Because I think that our forefathers knew a lot more than we do today about basically the sense of place, also the human scale. So even if you go back in the Greek history, you look at the columns, they're all proportioned to human scale. And we've gotten away from that in the last 50 or 60 years. and it's more like an urban sprawl. And Huntsville's subject to it. You took a look at all the other towns and cities around the country, and they're susceptible to it. But I think the idea is to try, or my passion was to try to create a sense of place, a place that you can go, that you want to go, not because you have to go, but you want to be there. And the people I talk to come in, and when I was selling property at the Ledges and also with Linden, is, when people come to Huntsville, where do you want to take them? And invariably, most of the answer is, I want to take them downtown. I want to show them the old town. Well, why do you want to show them the old town? Well, I don't know. It just feels good. Obviously, the landscaping has grown up and it feels warm. But, 100 years ago, people designed those neighborhoods over a period of time. They weren't all designed at one thing and built like a subdivision. And in downtown Huntsville, it's a mixed use. It's a mixed bag as far as the residential components. You got your $1 million houses up there, and you also have your little bungalows. You have apartments. There are 7 apartment buildings in Twickenham, and all of them kind of work together. You got a cross-section of the community. You just don't have captains of industry here and police officers in another neighborhood. That's all blended together. People live and work and actually play. Downtown Huntsville is becoming a great place to go and hang out. And it's in walking distance of one of our premier neighborhoods, which is unusual for most cities. But I guess answer your question is the passion of basically creating something that has a longevity rather than 15 or 20 years as far as some of your subdivisions have, and some of the commercial activities too. They were designed for 20-year life cycle, and then you go in and bulldoze them down and build another 20-year life cycle.
So you're playing out Lakey's.
Yeah,
one
Lakey was,
chart.
there's a lot of things that went through my mind as she was talking, and all of them kind of hit home as to, I tell people that I have fond memories of my grandfather who lived in Wichita, Kansas. And it was in a nice neighborhood, and they had little community stores, neighborhood grocery stores. He used to come home in the evening, gave me a nickel. I went across the street and bought an ice cream cone or a candy bar. And that's kind of my fond memories of how a little neighborhood or community ought to be. And of course, that transcends into what I'm trying to do today. And quite frankly, I'm trying to copy as closely as I can as downtown Huntsville. Downtown Decatur is another place. So anyway, that's my passion.
So Linden's not just housing. What other things are within Linden's program?
Well, to create a sense of not having to get out of or go someplace, you can walk to it, you can bike to it, you can possibly drive a golf cart to it. So we've tried to develop a live, work, and play atmosphere with the commercial activities. I'm trying to stay away from the McDonald's and the Walmarts and the bigger things. I'm trying to do a local flair. So when people come to town, I said, you need to go down to Linden because there's unique things there. It's local cuisine, it's local arts, it's local this and local that. So to create that sense of place and quite frankly, most of the people that I'm dealing with is a downsize situation. A lot of people that I've sold to live in the area, but they're in their 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot houses. Their kids are gone, they want to come and they want to downsize. They don't necessarily want to decrease the quality, they just want to decrease the size. Some of them even say, well, I don't want any extra bedrooms because the kids can stay someplace else.
As a designer, are you seeing more of a push among your clients to have design guideline oriented or development regulation oriented projects?
In general, I would, simply say yes to that. And I guess first, too, let me give the disclaimer that I'm not an architect and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So what I'm going to say is related more to the land planning and the flexibility and the scale of the street and those types of things, and other things that I express related to scale of the space is from what I have gained, I guess, in working with these types of projects over the years. But I would say that certainly it seems to be something that is becoming more desirable. and in becoming more common. And as Lakey said, it's something that I think that developers are seeing as more in demand. And one of the things related to that, I think, is, you know, in conventional zoning, you have pretty much one lot type in this neighborhood. So it's all, you know, R1, which is the bigger lots, or it's all, you know, multifamily or whatever. And I think one of the things, and I think John's trying to create in Linden also, is the ability, again, to buy into a community and be able to stay in that community. You don't have to, so you're a young professional, you might start out in something smaller there, and then you get married, you have a family, or that grows, you need something larger, and then when the kids move out, you love that community and you don't want to have to move, you know, 5 miles away to get into a different product. There's a mixture of product right there in the neighborhood that you've grown up in, and so the kids move out and you want to downsize again, you can still stay in that neighborhood and move to a different product type.
How can design guidelines or overlays be used to repair or upgrade some of the stuff we have?
Well, the zoning along the parkway, all the way from our northernmost city limits to our southernmost city limits, is all light and heavy industry. And light and heavy industry was started in 1963 with our current zoning ordinance, and it allows a myriad of uses, anywhere from residential to light industrial. And like the Parkway Place Mall is in a heavy industry district. The new Walmart's in a light industry district. We have apartment complexes in heavy industry districts. So it's not a matter of the uses being wrong, it's the fact that there's no performance standards for those zoning districts. And those zoning districts are only 100 to 150 feet deep. So there's a problem in the way that the zoning is now, not so much as use, but the way it's functioning. And so in order to redevelop that, you would need to combine some of those parcels. You need to break down those larger parcels into smaller parcels. Again, with the move toward the entrepreneurship and small businesses, we don't need those large parcels anymore. And so you have much fewer customers for those large parcels. They're going to sit there vacant. Whereas if you break them down, put additional infrastructure in there, break them down, put new streets, you'll have more of a flexibility in the market for those areas.